participants to kindly keep your mics in mute position. You can type any of your queries or questions in chat or comment section. Now I call upon Deputy Conservator of Forest, Kudremukha Wildlife Division, Mr. Rudran, Indian Forest Service, to give introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. We, Kudremukha Wildlife Division from the Karnataka Forest Department, are proud to host a live webinar on the occasion of the International Biodiversity Day this year. I wish to place on our record our gratitude towards Wildlife Trust of India for having joined hands with us in this effort. We welcome all the participants and the viewers for this webinar. Kudremukha National Park is an UNESCO World Heritage Site situated in the heart of Western Ghats. Western Ghats is also known as the Sahyadris. It is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world, featuring a very high species diversity and exceptional endemism in its composition, which adds immense importance to its conservation, failing which we stand to lose our natural heritage forever. Conservation of biodiversity as a part of national agenda is getting importance in the recent years. As you all are aware, the year 2010 has been declared as International Year of Biodiversity, and thereupon the decade 2011 to 2020 is declared as the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity to make people understand about biodiversity and its value. It is also pertinent to mention internationally accepted and binding action plans like the Aichi targets set by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which have since then evolved many strategic targets for conservation of biodiversity. India has also taken significant strides towards conservation of biodiversity by enacting the landmark legislation of Biological Diversity Act 2002, wherein it mandates approval from the National Biodiversity Authority and State Biodiversity Authority for companies to access and use biological resources. Also, it has facilitated grassroots level participation by Gram Panchayats in preparation of biodiversity registers. We get pure air, water, mineral resources, recreational value, forest and forest-based products, and above all, a habitable environment from the nature. Technically, these are called as ecosystem services. And the important thing is we get all of them for free. These are the intangible assets of our country. Like ecosystem services, biodiversity and traditional knowledge are also our national treasures that we need to vigorously defend as a nation in the pursuit of our economic interests. To put the picture in the current context, prevention of an epidemic itself is one of the benefits we stand to gain by conserving the biodiversity. I now call upon Dr. Basuraj, Assistant Conservator Kudremukha, to introduce the topic for the day and the speaker. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Topic of today's webinar is biodiversity and epidemics, the invisible link. Why this topic in the first place? As we all are experiencing, the world is going through a pandemic of unprecedented magnitude. Epidemics have occurred before, but this one is deemed the worst so far, with easy international travel and high population densities escalating its spread further. In this context, while the world was under lockdown in the past couple of months, people have become appreciative and sensitized to the need for protecting the natural environment. Increasing pressure on land for development has led to changes in land cover and its utilization. As a fallout of this, our biodiversity is under severe stress. The increasing interface between humans and wildlife has led to far-reaching impacts on species, like the immediate visible ones being conflict and consumption. This complex interaction is bringing in new emerging diseases of wild origin, like the current virus that is afflicting 5 million people of the world today and extending beyond. Today's scheduled speaker, founder and the director of Wildlife Trust of India, Mr. Vivek Menon, unfortunately is unable to join us today due to some unavoidable circumstances. The co-speaker, Dr. Ashraf, would be addressing the webinar today. In this background, let me introduce the speaker for the webinar. Dr. Ashraf NVK is the Senior Director and Chief Veterinary Officer in Wildlife Trust of India. He is spearheading the wildlife rescue, rehabilitation, and health division at WTI. He is instrumental in developing 3 rescue centers and more than 10 mobile veterinary units in different parts of the country. He was also part of the 3-member committee constituted by the Karnataka High Court to review all the elephant camps in Kudremukha in Karnataka as recently as last year, 2019. He is also a member of the IUCN Wildlife Health Specialist Group, Reintroduction Specialist Group, and Asians Elephant Specialist Group. His special interests are gibbon translocation, swamp deer translocation, conflict animal rehabilitation that included orphan elephant, rhino, clouded leopard, Asiatic black bear, and many other taxa. Today, he will be enlightening us on the complex linkages between biodiversity and epidemics and how our solutions are in nature, which is the theme of this year's International Day for Biological Diversity. Over to Dr. Ashraf for our first live webinar. Thank you, one and all.
Dear friends, I hope my audio is clear. You are able to hear me properly. Nice to know that many of you are from Kudremukh. I remember doing a survey in Kudremukh in 1990 on the Malabar civet and brown palm civet. In 1919, I remember staying in a guest house near Shimoga and then going up to the Kudremukh Iron Ores Limited and staying there in the guest house for doing a survey. That was I remember taking a drive from Mangalore to Kudremukh, right through the rainforest. And it was a very nice, pleasant, beautiful sight, but a little bit disappointed to see the forest being just divided into 2 halves because for the iron ores to be transported to Mangalore. Anyway, let me share my presentation. And as you know, I have just come as a super substitute in the last minute for Mr. Vivek Menon. Mr. Menon could not attend this particular event because of a prior commitment, and he requested me to do it on his behalf. Fortunately, being a veterinarian and being a subject of interest to me, I did not have a problem in accepting his request. Let me I just go to the presentation mode. Okay, the title given to us, rather, I didn't have a choice on this title, but it is a broad title, Biodiversity and Epidemics, the Hidden Link. I am the Senior Director and Chief Veterinarian at the Wildlife Trust of India. I've been working with WTA for close to 20 years. In this presentation, I will, to start with, do a brief recap of biodiversity conservation in India, and then try to link biodiversity loss and emergence. Emergence here means emergence of infectious diseases, and try to define what is ecosystem health, and give classic examples of emergence that has happened throughout the globe, particularly those with which we are familiar with. And lastly, I will spend a few minutes on how emergence itself is a threat to biodiversity. India, we all know, is a mega biodiversity hotspot. And we have 425 species of mammals, 1,300 species of birds, and nearly more than 3,000 species of reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. This is the diversity. It's a abode of diversity, Indian subcontinent. And we have established over 650 protected areas, which roughly extend to about 5% of our geographical area. In the sense, let's not forget that we have only 5% of our land mass under PA network. And not only in flora and fauna, India is also a mega human diversity hotspot. We have 1.2 billion people, next only to China, and we host 17% of the world's population. And nearly 1/3 of this 1.2 billion people depend on natural resources and critical ecosystems for their survival. You can imagine the amount of pressure we people have put on our natural ecosystems. And we come, not to forget, from the fact that we come from diverse cultures and traditions. So India is a mega human diversity hotspot as well. Conservation in India historically have been first with PAs. People say that the first PA in the world is Yellowstone National Park, established in 1872 in the US, but it is not so. The oldest protected area that the world had seen was the Gajavanas that you find in Arthashastra, written by Kautilya in 300 BC. There it was done 2,300 years ago. The other thing is, we say that the Animal Welfare Act was founded only in 1822 to prevent the cruel and improper treatment of cattle in UK. But strictly speaking, it was Ashoka who first came out with the edicts of Ashoka say very clearly, talking about wildlife, not only domestic and wildlife protection, and prescribing punishments for those who transgressed, violated animals' liberty. So these are the historical things that we need to understand before we comment. This is historical, our attempts to conserve wildlife. And conservation post-independence was confined to, we have managed to, I don't know what those scratches are. It never happened before. I can see some scratches on the screen. Anyway, conservation in post-independent India, we managed to achieve largely, almost entirely due to these three attempts. One is heavy policing, enforcement, strict enforcement, which helped in curbing the poaching, number one. Number two, we followed a exclusionary principle, which means we had our own exclusionary zones called protected areas that helped to secure areas, important conservation areas, protected areas. Nothing was allowed, or if at all anything was allowed, it was completely limited, and it was just a protected area network that we established. The third one is the so-called flagship and umbrellas driven approach that helped to cover a vast land. Tiger, the elephant, the tiger reserves are established across the landscape, between states, and elephant reserves that contributed to landscape conservation. So these are the three conservation initiatives that we have taken post-independent India. In the modern context, conservation in the today's India is a triangular paradigm of conservation. We have to consider they realize that our conservation efforts are still based on the dharma of ethical baseline of Ahimsa Dharma, which dates as perhaps even before 300 BC. And then we have the social angle. 1/3 of the world's poor live in India, which is a crushing reality. So ethical baseline on which we have this social angle, and a global, our economic aspirations of a growth rate of triangle. These are the present conservation realities in India. Now, with this background, let me go into the subject proper, which is emergence of infectious diseases. Now, we're talking about biodiversity loss. We know that drivers of biodiversity loss are anthropogenic pressures: deforestation, agriculture, farming, mining, pollution, etc. These are the main drivers. We all know about it. And what it does, all these anthropogenic pressures affects the ecosystem health. It impacts the ability of communities to provide ecosystem services. The community balance is disturbed, so it impacts the ability of the communities to provide the ecosystem services. And the result of this is a disruption in the normal transmission of infectious diseases in the ecosystem. I'll come to it. What is a normal transmission of infectious diseases? A good example is KFD, Kyawsinoor forest disease. Being people from Karnataka, you know that what led to the emergence of Kyawsinoor forest disease. In a healthy ecosystem, the interactions between species are natural. It is natural for a herbivore to feed on plants. We call it plant-herbivore interaction. It is natural for a predator to prey on ungulates and other herbivores. We call it as prey-predator relationship. And it is also a natural for a parasite or a pathogen to infect a host, what we call host-parasite relationship. Diseases are part of the system. They are not unnatural. So what is a healthy ecosystem? What is ecosystem health? We need to define what ecosystem health is. The definition would depend on the describer's background, the kind of background the person comes from, or is a perspective. A healthy ecosystem sustainably provides all its ecosystem services. Earlier, the speaker mentioned about ecosystem services. What are ecosystem services? An ecosystem provides to all species, not necessarily only human. Since health is the absence of disease, an unhealthy ecosystem manifests diseases. Simply put it, the system is not at ease. So disease is the failure of the ecosystem to function homeostatically. The balance is disturbed, homeostasis is disturbed, you end up in causing a disease. Disease is not only manifestation of infectious diseases, but other things as well. An emerging infectious disease is just one of the symptoms of a diseased ecosystem. If it becomes a pandemic like COVID-19, then we call it as diseased planet. How do we call it a planet diseased? Is this philosophically, what is that invisible link? We cannot see what is happening within. In all mystical traditions across the world, human body is considered a microcosm of the universe. The universe is the macrocosm. The human body is just considered as a representation of the universe. Microcosm at individual level, then you have a population level, ecosystem level, then you have at the biome level, and planet level, and then universal level. So you get this picture, and then what happens inside is always invisible, whether it is within or within an ecosystem. What is visible is the only outcome, So we talk about individual health, we talk about population health, we mention about community health, we mention about ecosystem health, biome, biosphere health, and planetary, that is what is planetary health of the planet and the universe. So the health of a planet and the biodiversity are interconnected. You have a healthy biodiversity, the planet will be healthy. And if you disturb the biodiversity, if there is a biodiversity loss, the ecosystem processes and you end up in getting unhealthy planet. Disease, as I said, just one of the outcomes of a disturbed planet or disturbed ecosystem. We as humans feel only when it is zoonotic. COVID is a very classic example. We are all affected, we feel it. And now we go back, try to understand what we have done to the nature. But pathogens do not discriminate evolutionary hierarchy. Just because you are humans, they're not going to discriminate between humans and animals. Humans are also just another species. What happens within is always visible. Only consequences are felt outside. Whether it is a human body or ecosystem, they're all roughly the same. Let me give you some examples of classic emergence that has happened across the globe. To start with KFD, Kiasunora-Forest disease itself. It's a tick-borne viral disease. We know what we call as arboviral disease. The predisposing factor, very simple, clearing forests and taking cattle inside, that led to the multiplication of ticks numbers, and it resulted in an epidemic in 1957. Now the disease has spread, in the sense newer epidemics have happened, and every event had a precedence, had a history of recent clearance of forests. Initially, it was only in Kiasunor. Now we have in all South Indian states practically, including parts of Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Goa, and Maharashtra. The other example I would like to give is Nipah, the Nipah virus, which is a paramyxovirus. The other one was an arbovirus. Now this one is a paramyxovirus that had its origin from fruit bats, reported in 1998. And the source was bats. You can get infected directly from bats by handling through water or its discharges, or through an intermediate host of pigs and dogs. And unlike COVID, which causes primarily respiratory distress, this caused encephalitis also. And humans, just like in KFD, was an incidental host. We're not supposed to get infected, but we became an incidental host. We are there everywhere. We enter forests, we get infected. The other example is SARS, very well known. Before COVID, SARS was the major pandemic. We call it severe acute respiratory syndrome. And it's a coronavirus that had its origin perhaps in bats. And humans got it directly or through intermediate hosts. We transferred it to pigs, civets, and got back from them. Just like what in COVID, we do not know whether the infection can come back to us once we have given it to cats. We are yet to establish, but we know that we can infect certain species of carnivores. Now COVID-19, we come to COVID-19, my fourth last example, also a coronavirus, another SARS. It is nothing but SARS, but highly contagious SARS. And reported in 2019, the vague end of last year. Origin confirmed that it is from bats. No other emerging disease has caused such an impact globally in global economy like COVID-19. Bats are the source. Pangolins are suspected to be the intermediate host. We still do not know. It will take some time before we get to know about the pathogenesis, origin, and even symptoms. Only every now and then, every day, they are adding new symptoms to the COVID virus infection. So what is an emerging infectious disease among wildlife? What does it do? What does it do? There are three types of, scholars have described three types of emerging diseases. Based on the epidemiology, they just classify them. Based on the predisposing factors, they classify them into three types. One is spillovers from domestic animals to wildlife. That is a emerging disease. Or spillovers, EIDs, emerging diseases related directly to human intervention via deforestation, host or parasite translocation, or host or pathogen translocations. Deforestation, we all know, classic example is KFD. Host or, just let me, host parasite translocation. Pathogen translocation is what is happening now. People are transporting COVID virus from one state, one district to another. through international travel. Host translocation is just you by transporting an infected animal, like illegal wildlife trade, or you are doing a conservation translocation program. You're taking an animal from one place to another and releasing it. That is also a source of a predisposing factor for infectious disease, emerging diseases. And lastly, EIDs, emerging diseases that happen without any obvious human-animal involvement. It just happens in the natural system. There is no, you cannot pinpoint a particular reason. All these three leads to two biological implications. One is wildlife as reservoirs of pathogen threaten domestic animals and human health. Number two, emerging infectious diseases posing a threat to the conservation of global biodiversity. It may come from wildlife, but it may in turn impact global biodiversity. What is good for the goose is also good for the gander. That is very important. What affects us can affect wildlife also. Now, vulnerability, humans, we know we are all vulnerable to emerging diseases based on our taxonomic similarity, affinity. Many diseases we share in common with, for instance, apes. We suffer from measles, SIV. Primates have SIV. We have HIV, Ebola virus. Both species are affected. KFD, both monkeys and humans are affected. Hepatitis A, both primates and humans are affected. Herpes, we have herpes as well as the primates also have their own herpes. So closely related species, species that are more taxonomically related, or more likelihood of them having the same set of diseases. These are a few examples that I wanted to cite. We should not forget that human evolution is no longer the survival of the fittest. We live in a social environment. Everyone gets an opportunity to get married, invariably, reproduce. It is not a question of survival of the fittest. We try to help even the poor. So technology and culture has changed so fast that our genes are not able to catch up with it. We have a system, the body is supposed to get used to it. We cannot survive vaccine without vaccines and all of these days. Those days are gone. We have domesticated ourselves. And because of that, we are very vulnerable to any new infectious diseases. We cannot survive without immunization. Right from childhood, we have to take immunization, vaccines to prepare ourselves for the eventual the pathogens that may infect us. We are now trying to find vaccines for COVID-19. So human anatomy is a compromised anatomy. 21st century human body is a collection of compromises. When diseases like COVID-19 strike, compromised bodies suffer the most. We are no longer fit, we are obese, and we suffer from all infectious diseases. So vulnerability of wildlife to emerging diseases. My last point, what is good for the goose is also good for the gander. The same principle applies to wildlife also. We may not see them, but wildlife can get affected. And it is a problem for wildlife health sector concerning wildlife and conservationists. It is a problem for human health sector concerning human health workers. It is also a problem, an issue that the animal husbandry people have to tackle. So we have these three sectors affected due to any emerging disease. The vulnerability point of view, I mentioned about our compromised human body. We are more vulnerable. Wildlife will be more resistant comparatively, but there is a difference. One more difference, which is that impact on humans and wildlife, there is a difference. Impact on wildlife will be confined. If there is an outbreak, it will be confined to that particular locality, unless you are transporting some animals to a new area. Unless you take a pathogen from you, and then it is very unlikely that you can get infected and infect another individuals another individual in another population. So epidemics within wildlife remain within wildlife. They may dissipate a population or they may decimate a species if you are unlucky. But it is unlikely to be a pandemic at one time. It can spread eventually over a period of time. Like, for instance, the canine distemper in Serengeti happened in Africa. In India, we reported only recently in Gir. But in the case of humans, we travel internationally. Because of our travel, we can convert a local epidemic into a pandemic. So that is the basic difference between wildlife and humans. In fact, in other words, they are affected, both will be affected. We notice what happens to us, we may not notice what is happening to the biodiversity. With this, hello? Hello? That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions to ask, you can ask. Let me share. I am getting a phone call.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, sir. I have one question on YouTube live from Madam Pushpa Rani. Her question is how this will help in human life. This seems to be a very pertinent question given the background of the presentation and the current situation we are in. Over to you, sir.
What will happen in human life? Which one? You are muted. What does she want to know? What will help in human life?
How this will help in human life.
This means what?
The topic. Biodiversity and probably the conservation of the biodiversity, how it will help human life. That is the whole crux.
That is the whole crux of the presentation. We mentioned about ecosystem services. Forget about the diseases. If you want a constant supply of water and clean air, you have to preserve your natural forest. Trying to plant somewhere else and destroying a natural forest will not give you water. You need the mountains have forests, and then very simply, and then you get water from there. If you want water, sustainable water, if you want to harvest, you need to protect your forest and biodiversity. Everything is interlinked. If you disturb it, we have to do sustainably. Unfortunately, our numbers are so huge. Our dependence is unfortunately not sustainable on many ecosystems, including marine. So unless we learn from it, unless we curtail our greed, we are in for a disaster.
Thank you, sir. I think you answered the crux of the whole presentation in a nutshell. We have one more question from Ms. Divya. Sir, bats are appearing to be playing major role nowadays in the disease outbreak. So, is bats and human diseases links are less explored? About you, sir.
Okay, no, actually we know Nipah came from bats, and also the coronaviruses, the SARS and all came from bats, plus many other species. The bats are reservoirs for about 70 types of species or types of coronaviruses. Usually we handle bats, we are not likely to get infected, but the potential is there for humans to get infected. The studies are going on. I'm sure a lot of studies. The US had a program called PREDICT to predict the potential of an emerging disease that can come from all species of mammals, not necessarily only bats. Many organizations are doing this, just doing a screening and looking at through screening only. They found out that 70 types of coronaviruses are there, corona alone in bats. Not only bats, many species harbor many potential pathogens that can, organisms that can become pathogens to other species. Yes, a lot of research is required, and research will continue. People are not bothered about these days about nuclear weapons. They have radars and everything to detect an enemy, but how to deal with the invisible enemy? This is nature's way to address killing one pathogen killing more than 1 lakh people across the globe. It is unprecedented. So we need more research from human point of view, particularly, and then from biodiversity point of view to predict the emergence, which means we should not only react to an emergency, we should routinely have projects that can help us screen the pathogens in all mammalian species, and then help us to understand what pathogen can cause a disease. We should be able to predict it, which means research is continuously required.
Thank you, sir. Next question I have from Lokesh Khan.
Yeah.
Will there be, is this pandemic give a chance for human to change his behavior?
Good question. I'm sure they will talk about it, discuss about it. It's just like an elephant train hit pollution. The train hit happens, an elephant dies. The questions are raised in the parliament and assembly. They will ask to constitute a committee, and after that, no more deaths, and then again they will wake up. So human nature, I don't, we are talking about reviving the economy. Reviving the economy means starting new industries, bringing in more resources. So I don't know, this, if we can't learn from this pandemic, never happened before, such a great big pandemic. If we don't understand from this, I don't think humans will ever learn. There cannot be a bigger calamity, bigger lesson for us than COVID-19. And already people are talking about taking some action to control global emissions and changing climate change. All these things, people are trying to take an action. And internationally, everyone has to come together and understand that unless we curtail certain things like completely ban illegal wildlife trade, have some compassionate ground, we have to change our lifestyle. Otherwise, changing lifestyle is very important, not necessarily eating habits, but all other aspects we need to compromise if you are thinking about our future, the planet's future.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Next question is from Kshitiz Saxena. Probably he or she wants to know about the how this KFD outbreak took place. Exactly what led to KFD outbreak? And the follow-up question is, were we able to identify the zero patient? What can the forest department do to prevent such outbreak to forest-dwelling communities, tourists, and even the frontline forest staff? I think this is also a very burning topic for southern India, and more particularly the Western Ghats of Karnataka. Over to you, sir.
So KFD, when the epidemic happens, a lot of public and National Institute of Virology was involved in the investigations, and now we have vaccines. It has taken many years for us to come out with vaccines. It is not as severe as COVID-19. KFD happened because every outbreak, whether it happened in Beltangadi or Wayanad or Shimoga or other places in Karnataka, you have a predisposing history of just clearing the forest or vegetation for cultivation or some activity. And then followed by that, you are bringing in cattle for grazing. Cattle are good mammals for ticks they harbor. So the ticks come in. The ticks are the intermediate host. The ticks are it's an arboviral disease, arthropod-borne viral disease. So it has to be transported through. These are all pathogens that can be transmitted through an intermediate host. Here it is the ticks. The ticks get infected. They don't die, but they can bite another mammal, and that is when people go. Cattle do not get affected because it is largely primate specific, and then langurs and all other species primates, langurs, bonnet macaques, and humans. There was severe mortality in the beginning, and many people, every epidemic has resulted in few human deaths. These days now, so largely, solely a result of deforestation.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question is from Amoga Varsha. You want to know how this global warming is affecting forest conservation. And the follow-up question is, what a common man can conserve the same? And probably
how global warming is affecting forest conservation.
Conservation, yes, sir. And what common man can do to conserve the wildlife?
Yeah, the most important thing is global warming is happening because we have failed to conserve the forests. We have failed. They say that for any country, you should have at least minimum 10% of the area as protected area, and forests cover one third of the land in a tropical forest area, not like Saudi Arabia. Anyway, there are no forests. I'm talking about in any tropical country, you should have about one third of your land mass as forests. Where do we have? We don't have. Not one third of vegetation, forests, we don't have. So all these things, now we had 95% of our tigers habitat, former distribution range, we have destroyed. We have only 5% or less than 5%. Elephant, 5 to 10% only we have. The rest of the distribution range is gone. Now within that available 5 to 6, the habitat is not good. The habitat is not good. It's disturbed, fragmented. With all these, we have, and that's a result of our climate change. Climate change over the years, which is natural. Man-made climate change is what we are seeing now. It is happening at a faster rate. So our mismanagement is leading to climate change. It's happening, and we have to curtail that. What was the second part of the question? What a common man can do? Common man can do, because see, the educated people, the intellectuals and the government have to educate the common man on the measures that they have to take. We have to learn from some countries where the people live in tune with the nature. A common man, like for instance, to start with, people in the cities, what can they do? They cannot you cannot ask them to stop using air conditioners, but we cannot ask them not to live in big settlements. But a common man should, living inside or in the boundaries of national parks and protected areas or PS, have a large role to play. The children have to be motivated on trying to live with minimum resources. Be sensitive at individual level, at community level. Be sensitive to whatever you do. Your carbon footprint has to be minimized. Very simple. If you're just taking a vehicle to go somewhere, you want to ensure that my emission, I should not contribute individually for emission. You want to go to the airport. I have the resources, I have a car, but take a metro. Anyway, the metro is going. Take a metro. Share your thing with other people, and that is one particular thing. Use of polythene bags, non-biodegradable material. Ensure that you don't use any plastic bags. Take your own bag. 30 years before, we never used to go to shopping and buy vegetables in plastic polythene. Why can't we go back? We have bags. Take bags. Plastics, microplastics, the amount of things that are dumped into the sea, everything goes to the sea. We are dumping everything to the sea. We evolved from the sea, from water as vertebrates. Now we are polluting our own, what we call the ocean of survival. So individually, I cannot list down what are things that we need to do, but we need governments that look at all these things and have a commitment, establish committees, and completely do a massive campaign. Children have to be sensitized on the way they live. We have a tough time. We have to reduce our dependency on the ecosystem. utilization has to be sustainable.
Thank you, sir. I think that also answers Darshan, yes, and Darshu question also. Divya wants to know how these diseases spreading from wildlife back to human or vice versa can be prevented.
How to prevent the
Yes, sir.
emergence of diseases. See, we do
Yes.
these so-called vaccinations and all. Vaccinations of livestock can prevent spillover from livestock to wild animals, we say. But vaccinations can be done only for known diseases.
Diseases.
Nobody vaccinates wildlife also. Wildlife cannot be vaccinated. They do it in European countries to control rabies. Again, from human point of view, we want to prevent ourselves from getting rabies. We give oral rabies vaccinations in red foxes. In UK, tuberculosis is a serious problem. The badgers are the source of disease for tuberculosis. So what they do is they kill the tuberculous reservoirs. They do massive culling in Europe. For them, tuberculosis, the cattle get tuberculosis from not humans, from badgers, from pastures where they graze. They share the habitat with the European badger. So what they do is to prevent that, they indulge in culling. So our conservation ethics ethos is built on ahimsa dharma. We cannot be killing species, individuals. So how to prevent is by making sure that whatever I mentioned during in my presentation, our interference to the ecosystem should be predisposing factors for loss of biodiversity should be addressed. We should minimize our dependency on resources, and we should be very careful. There are particular very good do's and don'ts. Already I can see after, even during this lockdown, the government is planning to denotify areas, protected areas for development activities. We have only 5% of our landmass as PA. What are we going to do? We have to at least make sure that the 5% is intact, plus all the buffer areas, the reserve forests are preserved for a period of long period of time to come. So if you address reforestation, degradation, unnecessary illegal mining, all these activities, and then wildlife trade, illegal wildlife trade, and ban all the wet markets, even legal wildlife trade, these are the ways to prevent an emergence from happening to and infecting domestic livestock and humans.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Achyut. He wants to know, does diseases affect non-familiar host? I do not know what you mean by non-familiar host.
Yeah. See, I said in all the 4 examples I gave, KFD, familiarity is one, accident is one. One is like in the case of KFD, it is not a question of unfamiliarity. We were accidental, but the pathogen was familiar to a primate. We are a primate, so it affected us. The cattle did not get affected, which means the pathogen has just, that was supposed to infect primates, infected humans. So that similarity is there. In the case of COVID and all these coronaviruses, the pathogen has jumped the host or adapted itself or mutated to infect a new host. Very good example is canine distemper, known to be affecting only dogs. It affected cats. We have a name called canine distemper, but it affected cats. So canines have their own parvoviral disease, but it affected. So the pathogen knocks every now and then. It will try to get a new species infected. It doesn't happen overnight. From thousands of 100 or 50, 40 years of knocking, and one fine morning or one day, the pathogen manages to change the receptors, evolve or mutate, and cause a disease. And when it happens first time, it will be generally very devastating. A good host, a good parasite or pathogen is one that does not kill a host. It has to get into an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. allow me to live for some time. I will not kill you. I may kill you after 50 years or 40 years. And meanwhile, I can propagate my pathogens, offsprings in other by infecting more people. That is what we call herd immunity. And over a period of time, everything will settle down because we are sure enough to come out with vaccines to address such diseases in future.
Thank you, sir. We have one interesting question from Aditi Lakkar. Like we have disease forecasting in plants, do we have any such thing in animals also?
Forecasting means in domestic animals, we have many diseases that come during a particular season. For some, there is no season. So if I like FMD, foot and mouth disease, people vaccinate before the monsoon. In the dry season, when you go to the forest, in the wet season, you get leeches. In the dry season, winter and all, you get ticks, for instance. So the ticks, through ticks, you can get many arboviral diseases or mosquitoes. So you have particular season, you try to address, make sure that what was the question? Can you repeat the question?
Disease forecasting in animals.
Forecasting.
Yes.
See, that's what I said. So we have a forecast. This is a monsoon season. This is the tick season. This is the mosquito season. We can forecast. But in the case of an emergence, we cannot forecast anything, any new disease emergence. But we can predict that these are the pathogens and potential for causing disease for humans, and we can take precautions. Like, for instance, if we know that disease is likely to come through a particular species of mongoose, we make sure that the mongoose is not traded. Even if there is a legal trade, ban the legal trade. Illegal trade, of course, or consumption of meat of that particular species can be made. So it's not that we may not have enough idea what to do, but we should have the will to enforce it and follow it.
Thank you, sir. One suggestion rather from Tulsi Harapo. We have biodiversity hotspots in national, international, and state level, but we need to identify hotspots at panchayat wise. As mandated by Biodiversity Act, we need extensive workshops like this to educate general public. This kind of suggestion. Do you want to throw some light on that, sir?
No, that's a suggestion. We have the biodiversity registers for various parks. And I think the gentleman is talking about biodiversity registers, biodiversity hotspots at the local level. Like, for instance, in a village, your sacred grove is a biodiversity hotspot. In a city, I don't know what can be a biodiversity hotspot, but the jungle, like every city has got a natural forest. A lake, a water body would be a biodiversity hotspot. Whether we can call them as biodiversity hotspot or not, but those are all remnants of natural vegetation or ecosystem that we have left unconverted, not converted, left it as such. So those are all like lungs for the city, very important, whether it serves a purpose or not. Those are all very important. In all major cities, the airports, the institutional campuses, a lot of institutions established in cities, they're all in very nice forested environments. A lot of wildlife survive there. And the master planning of such campuses has to be carefully done. You should not spread all your buildings throughout. You should confine, you should leave around 30 to 60 to 40, 60 to 50%, 50 to 60% of that, your campus unattended, left for people to walk and for recreation, for clean air. So that is very important. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your patience addressing of all the questions and queries raised by our participants. I think we're done for this webinar today. Thank you so much for all the participants for your active and wholehearted participation. I hope this will go a long way in conservation of the biodiversity, which ensures our own survival in the times to come. Thank you so much for all the participants. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
YouTube